Perfect. All right. So just to level set and kind of set the stage for our deeper questions that we're going to go into with each panelist. If you guys could each just very briefly explain in your terms what the difference between a small and large language model are, I think that would be great to set the stage.
I'm really more of a quantitative person, so I'll give you a quantitative description of that. Any language model, like large or small, like any LM, has certain number of billions of parameters in it. It started from millions to billions. So my definition is 10-ish billion and more. It is quote unquote large language model. 10-ish billion or less. It is a small language model. I'm really big on uncertainty analysis, so it's not a point estimate. That is a P50, so you can put your P10 and P90 around it and have those points. But hopefully you get that point.
Great perspective, Arjun. So, in my view, there are a couple of factors, multiple factors, right? I mean, when you talk about AI, Gen AI, it's all about how much data you're using to train and what's the compute and the storage, and then people and culture too. So, it's all about SLMs or specialized language models or like domain specific, where you can train those models with a specialized data and also make sure you can install them in a secure environment for low latency and things like that. So yeah, that's right.
Perfect. Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, sure. So there's essentially two camps in AI. One is a camp which believes everything is going to get automated, terminators, jobs are gone, and all that. And they're the maximalists. They believe in the big models. So GPT-4o, Sahara, all the new models you will see. But that's a promise of the future. The other camp is a pessimist camp. They believe that using something like XGBoost is good enough. Traditional ML methods are great. We don't have to do anything else. And then there's somebody right at the center, and they believe in small language models because it's cost effective and it's here and now, and you can solve use cases with them without having to spend a lot of money, almost 10 times less money than you would spend on a bigger model. So small language models are the answer to enterprises adopting Gen AI use cases.
I'll add that on the quantitative side, I think it's a question of when in time do you ask that question. If you ask that question about a year ago, the answer will be between 20 billion and 30 billion parameters. That's like the boundary. So over that is a large language model, lower than that is a small language model. But what we're seeing right now is, especially with the recent announcements, for example, from Microsoft announced the Pi 3.5, it's actually less than 10 billion parameters. So we're beginning to see that number go down below 10 billion. And I think the other factor there is also things like the energy footprint. They use less energy, less GPUs, both for training and for inference. So I think that will be the definition. So smaller in terms of the number of the parameters and also the footprint needed both to train and to perform the inference.
Perfect. Thank you. Very great. Different perspectives. All right, Ayo, I'm going to stay with you. So what are some practical applications where the efficiency of small language models are particularly an advantage?
Yeah, so I think I'll say that we're seeing an interesting kind of evolution. Let's take GTP. So we had GTP4, which is like over 1 trillion parameters, and that is kind of the gold standard. A lot of the benchmarks actually based on how GTP4 or how a language model performs against GTP4. But then we take GTP4o mini, and that has somewhere between 8 and 12. And the reason I say between because OpenAI doesn't actually disclose how many parameters they have. So it's a bit like it's inferred by other analysts who try to uncover exactly how many parameters are used. And so the use case that was used was a benchmark that is used to quantify the performance of large language models. It's called MMLU. So it's the massive multitask language understanding. So pretty much what it is it's a panel test of about 16,000 questions. These are multiple choice questions. across about 57 different topics. And on a score of 0 to 1, to 100, it benchmarks how well the language model actually answered those questions. And what was very interesting was that GTP4, which is over a trillion parameters, scored 86 points. And then GTP4 O Mini, which has like less than, let's say about 10 billion parameters, so on two orders of magnitude less, scored 82 points. So just 4 points. It's fascinating. So I think what we're beginning to see really is the smaller models are catching up. And I think that is the message that we're getting from some of the hyperscalers who are producing these models, that because we're beginning to see use cases where these models could be implemented in smaller devices that have a smaller energy footprint, a smaller memory footprint, that seems to be now the path going forward.
Thank you. It sounds like you are a big fan of small language models. I appreciate it. All right, Priya, I'm going to go over to you next. So how do smaller models address concerns related to data privacy and security, especially in times where that's top of mind for every organization? Would love for you to touch on that.
Absolutely, that's a great question and very timely, Catherine. And being in the data space for over 2 decades, I know the firsthand how important it is to treat customers' data when depends on which industry you are in. But if you consider financial services or healthcare, customer data, patient data is very important, and we have to pay utmost attention when it comes to data privacy, security, and ethics and things like that. So, based on my background, I'll share a few perspectives here. Being in financial services, it's all, gone those days are, right? What I'm trying to tell you here is nothing new. Most of you know this. However, our goal here is to emphasize on these aspects when considered SLMs versus LLMs, right? So gone those days are when we used to go to bank to apply for a mortgage loan. Gone those days are where you go to a bank to apply for a credit card or even a bank account or a loan, anything, right? Everything is happening on our fingertips, just on the mobile, right? You don't even need to go shop for it, right? You have these providers online that comes to you where you just put in your information and it gives you this, hey, these are all the providers, loan providers that we have, and you choose from the list, right? So it's basically like shopping for a loan, right? It's very easy. It happens in few minutes, or in fact few seconds as soon as you enter the data. So how is it all happening, right? It's all about how the models are being trained, how those models are specialized. When you're trying to use large language models, it is more generalization. More data, more compute, more storage. But when it comes to small language models or specialized models, think of this analogy like custom-made suit, right? If you're specifically focusing on specialized data, it's going to give you much more accurate results and much more faster results. So, and also financial services and healthcare is like, we always have to adapt to these new regulations like GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, right? So, protecting that customer data has to be our utmost attention. And where there is PI and AI, CFPB gets involved. So, this is a paramount that we need to pay attention to privacy and security, right? And I'll give you a couple examples here. One is fraud detection, right? In any financial services, they always have to deal with this problem, either at the time of giving a loan or later on during the transactions. And approaching this with the data minimization concept is like you are basically limiting the data that you are focusing, your models are focused, so that it knows exactly what data it is using for processing. And also it makes sure that it's applying the security, because those models are installed. It could be installed on your specialized or localized environments where you have security applied. So the data teams, when I talk about the security, it's not just the data team's responsibility, right? It has to be everyone's business. I mean, most of us are here, probably 90 or 100% of us are like data and AI space, but we are not the actual data creators. We are the facilitators. We make sure the data is being treated as a strategic asset. So it's the culture too. It has to be top down. Everyone in the organization has to treat this data as an asset and make sure you're producing the quality data. And the second aspect I want to talk about is being in the financial services, the risk mitigation when it comes to decision making. So when you're giving a loan to somebody, you want to make sure you're using the right aspects. You're actually using the right data when you are decisioning, so that there is no bias involved. So in credit decisioning, you're like this, you have LLMs and SLMs, right? LLMs need a lot of data to process, and it's going to take a long time to give you the results. If you're competing to get your provider to provide the loan to your customer, you want to be as fast as you can. I mean, you want to beat that even by milliseconds. So in this scenario, I feel that specialized and small language models are going to be a key in providing that right, accurate decisions. The third aspect I want to cover here is the efficiency in secure and high performance environments. If you think of any environments where speed and security are paramount, then like such as these high frequency trading platforms, because it's like transactions are happening every millisecond. So in these kind of environments, SLMs thrive. They excel in those environments to provide better decision making. Right? Before I wrap up, I'm glad that someone talked about ESG. Anywhere I go, anywhere I talk about AI, Gen AI, I love to bring that aspect here, because that's something that's often missed or overlooked among the tech or data leaders. So when we talk about, with the increase in LLMs, it's more increase in CPUs, GPUs, storage, data centers, impacting the carbon footprint, like somebody mentioned, right? So I feel that being tech leaders, we are responsible, and we have the responsibility to commit to those sustainable practices. So I urge that everyone have that mindset when you're thinking of using SLM or LLM. Use that use case specific scenario to solve the problem. Let's not just apply LLM to every problem that's out there. So let's be cognizant about using SLMs where it's like fit for purpose, right? So I think going towards this approach, and also with so much awareness happening recently on the SLMs, I'm pretty sure that the innovations that we develop will be impacting our greater planet.
Thank you, Priya. I like how you touched on data security being a part of the company's culture, and not just the data owners or the people processing or touching the insights, right? But it really needs to be part of the company's entire culture, which I think we all could probably agree a lot of organizations are still progressing and maturing in, right? All right, Arjun, I'm over to you. Can you discuss the trade-offs between cost and performance when considering small language models versus large language models?
Sure, yeah. I think it was IO who gave a really good example of using GPT-4o and GPT-4o mini. We should probably cross notes, because I have a use case for a natural language translation process. In the past, like if you go to, if you want to do translation, for instance, invoke Google, and you can ask, you can just use the API on the web using the Google Translator, and you would do that in the back end. It is usually a neural machine translation, right? NMT. The backbone of that is long short-term memory, or LSTM. So that is an actual neural network which runs in the backend. So I just want to give that context. In the new world of language translation, when you have to get the context and the intent and have a high degree of accuracy, there is an evolving landscape of using generative AI or large language models, or I would say language model, for this translation purpose. And at enterprise scale, so you're not talking about translation for fun or for leisure, right? Like at enterprise scale, for instance, an example I can give is, in my company, we have e-commerce and we have our omni-channel platform. If you're a global company and if you have, if you're into e-commerce, based on the region, there is actual mandate that you have to publish the marketing content in the language for the region, right? And then on the other side, there's also product. If you're an e-commerce company, you have products, millions of SKUs in your portfolio. Again, the product contents and the description of the products might also have to be translated. So language translation for at least global companies from a marketing and e-commerce side is a big landscape. If you look at the TAM, I think it's $100+ billion opportunity up there. And in the large language model scope, like what I want to say is like between GPT 4.0 and 4.0 mini, I can just like quickly go over an experiment that we did to translate to a certain language within the North America region. I won't give more information, but between 4.0 and 4.0 mini, if you go to context.io or any website out there, you can see what is the price comparison. So I think as of last week, it was 33x, right? So to invoke a GPT 4.0 for a certain prompt is almost 33 times more expensive than that of GPT 4.0 mini. So that context. And for context scale, I think IO talked about it. 4.0 is about 200 billion-ish. I always like to use that uncertainty, especially with OpenAI. They don't share that, so we need to use that. And for GPT 4.0 mini, it's like an order of magnitude smaller. It's around that 8 billion or 10 billion whatever. So price is 33x. Performance, what we did is we had a linguist, an SME in the loop, validate, take samples and do the validation, came up with a human score for that language based on the validation. And these things were like really close. Like you're talking about 9.5 out of 10 for GPT 4.0 and 9.25 out of 10 for GPT 4.0. So what I'm saying is the trade-off between price and performance is always going to be there. And those are just two different dimensions to answer your question. One of the metrics that I like to use, and I'm again very big in coming up with quantitative metrics, so price to performance, right? So you can think of price to performance, and again, I'm not saying convert it as raw values of the price to performance, but you can think about some derivative metric of the price and the performance that you get and say, hey, does that meet my SLA for my business need for that scale? Does that meet my SLA? There are a few other dimensions I want to touch upon. Very closely related to performance is the latency. Say for e-commerce application, again, take the same thing, not for the example that I quoted specifically because that's more of a static example, but say if you want to do something in real time and you want to do a product recommendation, you want to search something on the fly. If you have, like the example that I quoted, like a 4.0 mini, which can do the job as good as a 4.0 for you, you're going to have low latency in the search result, in the retrieve result of the search. So that is a key metric to use. And then availability. I have worked in AWS before this, and I was a global business development manager there for high performance computing and AML. So now with what Azure is doing with OpenAI, or what Google is doing with Vertex AI suite of models, or what AWS is doing with Bedrock, most of you probably go through some hyperscaler, right? Or Databricks themselves as a platform provider, they're coming out with AI offering as well. So irrespective of whichever hyperscaler you go, there's an availability. It's usually in US East or somewhere in Ireland. These models have specific price for that region. Now I know that Ireland and Washington are the most expensive, but like if you're okay to compromise on the latency, but use somewhere from Brazil at half the cost, then that is another dimension to think through. So I just want to paint multiple dimensions that it's not a slam dunk. And I've also worked at ExxonMobil for 15 years. There I was overseeing high performance computing, that is building our own data center. It was top 15 in the world, right? Competing with the likes of the national labs, Berkeley National Lab and LANL and others. One of the perspective I want to give is when you think about putting your AI/ML model, there is another metric which is power or the energy consumption. So one metric we used to do in the energy companies when you want to run your AI/ML workloads is price to performance to power. So that is another dimension. One last point I want to add on, because I was part of the committee who would review how much of power is being consumed, how much of natural resources like water for cooling in the data room is consumed, and had to report it out as part of scope 3 emissions while I was at Exxon. So one thing I can say is now with the latest advent, at least as of GPT 3.5, any water bottle that you take, it's usually like half a liter. One prompt, one interaction with ChatGPT takes half a bottle, or takes almost a full bottle of water. It is 50 centiliters. So just have that in mind, and like when you, I mean, I'm not saying that you all are, I mean, we all make people in Africa deprived of water and all that, because that was a comment that a UN ambassador made when they heard about it. But my point is, if you are closer to the building, data center, and looking into that, then how do you recycle water, or how do you use other cooling for that becomes very important. I know I slightly digressed by that, but since that ESG is of utmost concern for all of us, we're all talking about it, but I don't see anybody doing anything. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Arjun. All right, so you guys have all talked about the benefits of small language models. So I'm going to tap on your shoulder now to talk about the limitations of small language models.
Well, there's plenty. Excuse me. So I want to just quickly double click on the point about GPT-4o and GPT-4o Mini. Never get locked in by a single vendor. OpenAI is not open, it's closed AI. So have your options open, be cloud agnostic and be model agnostic. When it comes to small language models, there are limitations. I mean, all 8 billion parameter models sound the same. It's the only key difference is the data on which they were trained on. So if it's the answer is not small language models limitations, it's like, what are we using the small language model for? The answer is never going to be a single model either. So let's just take an example. If you were to build a use case for document ingestion and classification, right? You start with the GPT-4o, you're like, okay, it's almost $4 or $10 for 1 million tokens. But GPT-4o Mini is 33 times cheaper. But then again, I'm hitting the rate limit. So what are my other options which I can pick up? So open source has plenty of options you can take. You can fine tune those models specifically on your data. You own the weights of those models, and you also own the data on which it was fine tuned on. So this way, you're not sending your data to a third party like OpenAI. You're using the power of open source, and that way you can get rid of the limitations. The second is cost per inference is going down. It's going down to levels where it will almost become negligible. So intelligence is becoming extremely cheap. So the answer is not going to be, again, a single GPT-4o Mini. You will have a single LLM doing a single task. But in the next 18 months, or 12 or 18 months, you will see a multi-architecture, multi-LLMs, different LLMs doing different tasks, and a swarm of LLMs doing a swarm of tasks. That's the future we're heading in. And that future is interesting because it's pretty much like a Hollywood movie, like a WALL-E or iRobot or any what have you. Is that we're heading into a future where a lot of the stuff we do will just be taken over by these small language models. Summarize this email for me has already been used by everybody. And it's not going to be just summarize this email for me. It's going to go like, not only summarize this email for me, notify my bosses, all the stakeholders involved in this meeting, and go update the CRM. And so it not just becomes a language model which is dumb enough to just generate some tokens for you, but goes one level ahead and does the action for you. And that's where, again, the smaller models are going to be extremely efficient for some of the stuff. The new and upcoming stuff is function calling, tool use, and these two things, along with LLMs, are going to change everything we see. So the conversations we have right now are going to be much, much different in the next time we meet. And as for the limitations, I mean, if you have engineers or hackers in your team, they'll figure it out.
I love that they're just going to figure it out. So I think that's time for us. Do we have time for a quick question?
Yeah, let's try to get one quick question. And anybody have a question for the panel? Okay, no questions?
I can ask it.
Oh, go for it.
Yeah, because you guys got ESG and I know environment always gets the whole spotlight when we talk about ESG. The social and governance part is equally important. And we were discussing in the previous panels about gaps. So what I want to ask is on the social and governance aspect, employee readiness around LLMs, if they are even ready to adopt it, the kind of job security scare that they have, that if they don't adapt now to this technological advancement, they are like going to be behind. So I just wanted to ask, like, as people leaders, how do you guys face that and mitigate it?
Sure, I can take that. So, like I mentioned, right, it is about the culture first and awareness. So we first, I think we need to attempt on bringing that awareness that none of these AI or Gen AI tools are going to take away the jobs. They're going to create new jobs, right? Exactly. I mean, when internet came, everyone was scared. There were like so many articles about people who were trying to bring in internet into government. They were kind of, they faced through a lot of challenges. I read so many stories from India, right? Same thing when the cloud came, right? Even when ATMs came. New technologies are coming, but it's up to us how we want to use them, right? So the first, I think that there is a myth about these tools taking away jobs. I think that's something as a leader, as leaders, we have to address that and bring that awareness into our organization. And most of the times, it cannot be bottom up. It has to be top down, right? So it has to come from the leadership and say, hey, this is how we are going to approach, and let's create this awareness across the organization. What is the strategy? You don't want to just bring in just AI tool or Gen AI and just ask that, hey, just go build it. No, you got to create that awareness and let them know, hey, this is the safe area. We are creating this sandbox for you. You can go play with it, experiment it, and know that it's like a playground, right, where your kids can go and play, knowing that there is a safety net if they fall down. So provide that kind of security and safety so that your team can experiment and innovate things. And then slowly, use case, again, give them right use cases and to solve it. And then show the business that this is the ROI we are getting using this. It is like slowly you're changing the culture. It is not like one day, 1 month, right? It is a continuous process, and it has to happen at every single level of your organization.
Well, let me piggyback off that, Priya. I think a lot of it comes to having talent strategy conversations, right? So sitting there and saying, what are the skills we have today and what are the skills we need for tomorrow? And talking to your employees about it's okay to reskill. It's okay for your competence to change in the work you do, right? The competencies you have today might be different in 5 years. And honestly, if we're looking at the way that technology is going, all of our competencies today will be drastically different in 5 years, right? They'll have to be. So I think it's some of that of being transparent about how it's okay to reskill. If some of those jobs that will go away, but new jobs will come up, you'll have to reskill into some of those things. And so encouraging organizations to have those conversations now, start talking about your talent today. I think that's a big key to this.
I'll just maybe add one other dimension to this. It's a very interesting statement that Sam Altman made, the CEO of OpenAI, and he said he has a chat going with some fellow CEOs, and they have a bet, and the bet is, when will the first one-man, $1 billion company emerge? So the opportunity is that AI and Gen AI will empower individuals to actually become companies. So I think we need to think a little bit wider, and there's a huge potential.
If I can just add one thing, because that's a great point. We were just having a chat in the hallway. Dallas, as a city 5 years back, I've not seen this thriving entrepreneurial community here. And now the fact that it is creating that entrepreneurial community, part of it because of Gen AI. So yeah, in terms of job opportunities, I would say jobs don't get replaced, they get displaced. And then how you do workforce planning for that is the essence. Like I do AI strategy consultation for big companies and small ones. And as a part of that, most of them ask, hey, how do you help me create a playground? What's the right tech stack to use? How do I go from POC to scale? One thing that I make sure is that put workforce planning as a part of your process. That should be part of your AI strategy, because reskilling and upskilling your employees needs to be a part of it. So to answer your question, it won't get replaced. And that has been with all era of automation, right? From industrial revolution and so on and so forth. Auto industry faced it, right? People who are using hammer to kind of do like nuts and bolts using wrench and whatnot, then kind of, like in the 80s when Detroit started to get like that auto hub, then they kind of went through that automation. Then instead of them being wrenchmen and whatnot, they started to do QA/QC. So the same people were reskilled and they displaced their job to some other thing, which is probably for their better and whatnot, right? And the same thing with coal mine workers. So you can go back the history lane and say that I would say this landscape of Gen AI and AI is just like fits within that automation realm.